Welcome to the Power Grid briefing for media. Thank you for joining us today. Just a few housekeeping notes. If you're joining us on Zoom, please keep your microphone muted. This briefing is being recorded, and the Zoom recording will be made available on YouTube this afternoon. If we have any problems with Zoom spammers, or the meeting is otherwise compromised, we will just end the meeting and restart using the same link. Today we have 4 speakers, and we'll be hearing from them all in order and then taking media questions at the end with a question and a follow-up question per outlet at least. So today we will be hearing from Katherine Babcock, Director of Maintenance with Yukon Energy, Tony Badry, Manager with Atco Electric Yukon, Shane Skarnulis, Manager of Response Operations with the Emergency Measures Organization with the Government of Yukon, and Ursula Geisler, Emergency Management Program Specialist for the City of Whitehorse. We're holding this briefing because the last month of extreme cold has brought lots of questions up with the public and the media, and we thought it would be beneficial to offer media a chance to hear from our technical specialists and to also be able to ask questions of all of our technical specialists at once. So today speakers will be discussing the Yukon electricity system, cold weather protocols, and emergency preparedness. As I said, we'll be hearing from all 4 of our speakers and then media questions at the end. So first of all, Yukon Energy.
So across the Yukon, we experienced a prolonged cold period through the month of December. At times, Yukon Energy's generation capacity was nearing its limits. Today, I'll give an overview of the mutual aid guidelines we have in place that allow us to manage these situations and ensure the power grid remains in a stable place. All right. So the Yukon's main power grid is managed by 2 utilities, Yukon Energy and Atco Electric Yukon. Both utilities have generation, transmission, and distribution assets, but Yukon Energy is primarily responsible for the generation and transmission, and Atco is primarily responsible for the distribution. So here we have a map that shows an overview of the electricity system in the Yukon. You can see the colored lines that show the transmission lines that connect various communities. If you refer to the legend on the right and look at the map, you can see where Yukon Energy and Atco have different generation assets. And as a general rule of thumb, where you see generation assets, that also indicates the company that's responsible for the distribution in that location, but one major exception being Whitehorse, where you can see Yukon Energy has generation assets, but Atco is responsible for the distribution. Here we have a graph that shows YEC's generation over a 2-day period. And on a typical day, YEC's generation is fairly equal to system load. So the red line shows that generation, and the gray line shows the temperature and Whitehorse. This load curve can take on different shapes throughout the year, but there's generally always a morning peak and an evening peak. And 2 characteristics we like to point out for this time of year are that the load does not decrease very much during the day, and those evening peaks are generally larger than those morning peaks. We also like to point out just how quickly the load can rise when you're heading into those peak times. So if you look at the morning peak, which is the start of the graph from night up to that first peak, the load rises at a rate of roughly 2 megawatts every 15 minutes. To give that a bit of context for Yukoners who are familiar with our generation equipment, that's like turning on one of our rental diesel generators every 15 minutes to keep up with that increase in load. Evening peaks are a bit more gradual at roughly 1 megawatt every 15 minutes, but these both indicate the need for us to have a solid plan in place so we can react quickly if we need to call on support during these times. In our mutual aid guidelines, we've designated different colored zones that determine different actions we would take. These zones are based on the percent of generation that Yukon Energy has in use compared to the percent we have available at any given point in time. So when we're in the green zone at less than 70%, we call that normal operation. When we're in the yellow zone of 70 to 85%, we have heightened awareness, future demands are monitored, and activities that could take generation out of service are evaluated. In the orange zone of 86 to 90%, that's where we're starting to near our safe operating limits, and we start to engage with our mutual aid supports. If we ever get up into that red zone, that would generally mean all mutual aid supports have been engaged, and if things are going to progress further, that's when we evaluate if rotating outages are required. So here's our mutual aid support steps. First, we call on industrial customers, which are the major mines, to disconnect from the grid and go on their own generation. Second, we call on Atco to turn on their community diesel generators that are connected to the grid. Third, we ask mine remediation sites to self-generate and disconnect from the grid. Fourth, we would engage with EMO Yukon, and with them we would call on other customers, such as large facilities that have their own generators, to go off the grid as well. This could be Canada Game Centre or Whistle Bend Place or other large facilities. Fifth, we would call on the public and ask them to reduce their electricity load to critical use only via our Alert Ready system. And as a last resort, it would be rotating outages to ensure the grid remains stable. So if we bring those color zones together with those mutual aid steps, here's a simplified representation of what the process would look like. So we have YEC's generation designated by the different colored zones, and we have load increasing along the bottom. So the first time the load increases into that orange zone above 86%, that's when we call on the major mines to disconnect from the grid and reduce YEC's generation requirements. The load keeps increasing and we progress into that orange zone again. That's when we call on Atco to turn on their community diesel generators. The third time we progress up into that orange zone, that's when we call on the mine reclamation sites to turn on their generators. Then after that, if we're going to progress through that orange zone, that's when we engage with EMO. We ask facilities to turn on their generators, and we send out that public messaging. From there, if load continues to increase and we progress into that red zone, that's when rotating outages could happen. Here we have a graph that shows what things looked like at the start of December when the cold period first started. So you can see the gray line of temperature is slowly decreasing over the first few days, and the load is gradually rising each day. Then the evening of December 8th, you can see there was a significant evening peak, and that's when that Whistle Bend outage occurred, but the system was not strained at this time, so we could recover from this outage quickly. Then the next day, temperatures dropped significantly, and you could see we had another significant evening peak. Then the next morning of December 10th, the load was right back up there, and that's when we started to engage with our mutual aid supports because we were in that orange zone. So we called on major mines to turn on their generators and disconnect from the grid. We called on Atco to turn on their community diesel generators, and we sent out some social media posts. Just to clarify, the social media posts are separate from the Alert Ready messaging. Social media posts can happen at any time. And then you can see how YEC's generation requirements decreased that day. And with the estimated supporting generation we had online, we also estimate that the public reduced their load by roughly 3 to 5 megawatts for that evening peak. Then throughout the next day, we kept those mutual aid supports engaged. And you can see once again, we did not have a significant evening peak. So thank you, public, for keeping the load low again. Then the next morning of December 12th, during morning peak, our LNG facility tripped offline. This suddenly put us into that red zone, so we engaged further mutual aid supports. We called on the mine remediation sites, and they turned on their generators and disconnected. We put out more social media posts, and we started the process of engaging with EMO, but then we got the facility back online and didn't have to actually carry out the steps of stage 4 of the mutual aid, where EMO engages with other facilities. Throughout the remainder of the cold period, we engaged mutual aid supports as needed. It was mainly just steps 1 and 2, which is the major mines and Atco. And today our load peaked at just 99 megawatts, which was 74%, which puts us in the yellow zone. And with that, I'll hand it off to Tony.
Good afternoon. As mentioned, Tony Badry. I'm the business manager for Atco Electric Yukon. I'll just start out with the current status of our distribution system at Atco. So all of our distribution assets are running as they should in the cold weather. All our equipment is cold weather rated, running normally. Our isolated and our standby plants are fueled and ready. Our isolated plants aren't connected and don't contribute to the grid, but our standby plants do. We have 5 standby plants that are capable of contributing 5 to 6 megawatts to the grid. We also have 2 hydro units at Fish Lake, although small, combined about 1 megawatt, but they do contribute as well. Some of the actions we're taking in the extreme cold, we increase our staffing, so we have more personnel on call, more people at the ready. We're deferring all our non-essential maintenance, so we're not working on the system unless absolutely necessary. We're mostly on standby. We're monitoring our equipment, we're monitoring our feeders, our lines, and of course, working in close coordination with Yukon Energy on our grid capacity. As I mentioned, we'll run our standby plants if needed at the request of Yukon Energy. We're also going into the rural areas. Some of our overhead lines are susceptible to heavy snow loading, danger trees. So we're removing those as necessary to prevent possible outages. So rotating outages, if they're required, they are a last resort. After all other options have been exhausted. So what will happen there is Yukon Energy will contact Atco Electric Yukon, notify us that rotating outages are required. We'll implement those outages and we'll put out a schedule of outages with locations and times with as much advance notice as possible. So the outages will be about 2 to 4 hours, depending, before restoring and shifting to the next area. That'll give our crews time to review our switch orders and place personnel where they're needed in the field. Critical locations, hospitals, some of the city utilities, communication infrastructure will remain energized. So the rotations are going to continue until such time as we can get the system stabilized and customers back online. So the purpose of rotating outages, number one, is grid stability. We want to prevent a cascading system outage. That's the main point. We want to keep our equipment in safe operating levels. We want to ensure proper voltage and frequency control. They're going to be balanced interruptions, so neighborhoods in the Whitehorse area will be called upon for rotating outages. We won't be focusing in on any one particular area. All residential neighborhoods should be ready to be part of that rotation. As I mentioned, critical services will also be maintained. We'll be working closely with Shane and EMO if there's any other locations that need to remain energized as well. We'll also take this time to stabilize the system. So if we need any time to bring on more generation or repair any equipment or rebalance the grid. So we'll take that time to shift around any load we see that will benefit the system. There's also a safety factor in this. So by using small manageable outages, we're going to avoid large voltage drops or surges that could be dangerous to our crews and the general public. So this graph shows a typical load profile for a subdivision that would be involved in one of these rolling outages. So you can see the normal load is consistent. We get to an outage, we drop off. It's very easy for the utilities to de-energize, but when we go to re-energize, that's when things change. So you can imagine in a household, all household appliances are now calling for power all at the same time. This is going to raise the load requirement. sometimes 2 to 3 times what it was under the normal load conditions. And after it's re-energized, it's going to take a while for the system to stabilize and things to return back to that normal loading. You can liken it to starting your car in the cold weather. At first, your car is going to use more fuel. It's going to run a little harder until it gets to that safe operating temperature and you can drive it normally. So there are some things that the general public can help us out with during the peak usage times and these cold load pickups. So reducing all non-essential electricity use. Delaying any high load activities, so washing your dishes, doing your laundry, charging your car. Also, if you have an electrical furnace or heating, you can set your thermostats a little lower. That will allow for them not to call for heat for as long when energized. And lastly, what customers can expect if the system reaches its capacity. So information updates are going to come out from EMO on their Alert Ready system. Shane will elaborate a little bit on that. This information will also be shared on Atco Electric Yukon's channels and Yukon Energy's channels. So people have multiple locations to get that information. Some of the information that will come out at first will be alerts to immediately reduce load. Some examples of that would be hot water tanks are a big one. Maybe unplugging your freezer, putting your block heaters on timers. Any of those small adjustments over the whole system is going to have a large impact. That being said, if the demand continues to rise, we might have to put out a notice that rolling outages are going to occur. With that, I'll hand it over to EMO.
Thanks, Tony. All right, so my name is Shane Skarnulis. I'm the Manager of Response Operations with Yukon's Emergency Measures Organization. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we work with our partners in the critical infrastructure utilities and what communities can do to prepare. So as you can see, we hold regular tabletop exercises, planning and drills with our response partners. We've been working on this mutual aid guideline for several years now, implementing the lessons we've learned from previous exercises and incidents. We did a drill in the fall of 2024 where we actually took both Canada Game Centre and Whistle Bend Place off the grid so that Yukon Energy could get real numbers to see how much they would gain when we did this, so they could use that for their planning. We met again this fall just to go through the process again up to the point of implementing the rolling outages so that we were all ready in case we had to reach that step. We've worked together quite a lot. As Tony mentioned, the critical facilities will be kept out of the rolling outages. However, the long-term care facilities that the government of Yukon operates, such as Whistle Bend Place, Copper Ridge, Thompson Centre, and the McDonald Lodge up in Dawson, all do have their own backup power, as do the 3 Yukon Hospital Corporation facilities. But those are true emergency generation units for emergency facilities, so we try and keep them on grid for as long as possible. So to focus in on how we play in the mutual aid role, as has been discussed, when we reach the orange stage, Yukon Energy reaches out to us and they notify us. And then, I don't think I've heard this mentioned, but we actually have a joint communications team where Yukon government communication staff work closely with the communication staff at Yukon Energy, Atco, and in most cases the City of Whitehorse, to make sure that the lead agency, which varies depending on if it's an unplanned outage or a grid situation, will be the lead messaging, and then the rest of the organizations will help share that messaging. So when we enter into orange, we're brought in for awareness. We make sure our facilities staff are aware, and that's when things come out like the social media, sharing information with local media such as yourselves. But once it moves into kind of the red phase, The Yukon government at that point will take over the lead for the messaging, and we transfer everything to yukon.ca. At this point, if we need to call on public for emergency load reduction, that's when we use the Alert Ready broadcast system. That's the system that we test every May and November that makes your cell phones go off, interrupts the radio and TV broadcasts. This was done in January of 2024 in Calgary when they were facing some grid challenges as well. So this isn't a novel approach. Yukon.ca/emergencies is considered the source of truth. So that's where the most up-to-date information will be posted. This will also get shared on social media and local media. And if it were to progress to rotating outages as a last resort, like I said, the information on that will be shared on the social media sites as well as yukon.ca. We will use the Alert Ready system again to notify the public that we will be moving to rolling outages and to prepare for that by doing simple things like turning off breakers to hot water tanks, which limits the cold load pickup that Tony mentioned when power is restored to that area. And then we'll be sharing the plans and the locations for those outages on both social media and local media, again, in a joint communications approach. If we do have an outage, one of the big things that is a concern for the general public while they're trying to keep warm is carbon monoxide and carbon monoxide poisoning, right? It's colorless, it's odorless, you can't see it, you can't smell it, but if you start to feel dizzy, confused, or sleepy, get outside as best you can. I mean, these things normally happen in extreme cold temperatures, and call 911. Make sure you've always got working smoke detectors and carbon monoxide detectors in your house as per code, which is essentially on every floor and outside sleeping areas, and those alarms should be tested. If, like most people, you don't necessarily follow the rule on that one, when we get into a grid challenge situation, it's a really good idea to just go around and test them at that point so you make sure things are good. People will resort to anything to keep themselves warm, but again, just a reminder, don't operate a generator or barbecue, things like that, inside your house. If you are running a generator, make sure that it is away from your house, the exhaust is pointed away. And if you're connecting a generator to your house, hire a professional. Safe generation installation saves lives. If you're jerry-rigging it, you can actually feed power back into the line, and the transformers work both ways, so it will increase the power of your generator and feed it into the line, creating a danger for the utility staff that are trying to restore power to your area. Right, and always, again, make sure your heating systems are clean and inspected every year. Be mindful in the cold that frost buildup can impact exhausts and other things. We should all have emergency kits that are not the same thing for all seasons. A summer fire kit is different from a winter power outage kit. So make sure that your emergency kit has things for cold weather. Flashlights are always a great thing to have. Drinking water, food that doesn't require electricity to use, that sort of stuff. Consider your vehicle as well. I mean, in these cold temperatures, vehicles can break down. We've seen a lot of issues with tires and flats and increased accidents. Having that emergency kit in your vehicle is always great. Make sure you've got warm clothing, booster cables, food, water. If you're traveling long distances in the Yukon, make sure you share your plan with somebody and check in so that they know where you're going and when you expect you. Again, we do work closely with the utilities, and very soon there'll be a winter safety campaign that's been created and in the works with the Yukon government and both Yukon Energy and Atco, and it will be coming later this month. And that'll include electrical safety, power outage preparedness, and where to find information. And again, Yukon.ca is the quick and easy thing to remember, and from there you can get to the emergencies or the preparedness. So prepareyukon.ca has all sorts of wonderful information about how you can build a kit, how you can help make a plan for your family, and how you can just generally be ready for the things that come at us in the remote north. Again, preparedyukon.ca and yukon.ca/emergencies. Ursula.
Thanks, Shane. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ursula Geisler, and I'm the Emergency Management Program Specialist for the City of Whitehorse. So as you've heard from the rest of the speakers here, the City of Whitehorse works very closely with both the utilities as well as Yukon government to make sure that we're prepared for any outages that might happen in the Whitehorse area. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about warming shelters in the Whitehorse area. I know there were quite a few questions about that previously. So as mentioned by both Katherine and Shane, we do have an agreement in place that if there is a power outage and the load needs to be reduced, we would take the Canada Games Centre offline and have it on its own backup generator. It having its own backup generator means that even if there is a power outage, it will remain open and we'll be able to heat it. So it's a place where folks can go to warm up. If there's a power outage during the day, there's lots of businesses that'll be open for the general public, so those are always good spots to go if your house is starting to cool down a little and you need to go somewhere to warm up. One of those, again, being the Canada Games Centre. Like I said, it's open most days for extended hours, and there's always lots of activities happening there as well. So if there's a prolonged power outage in cold weather and we are expecting it to last overnight, that's when we would establish a warming shelter, essentially, where we would have, again, it would be the Canada Games Centre most likely designated for that, where we would set up a congregate shelter, and we wouldn't do that by ourselves. We'd be working very closely with Yukon government and a few departments within Yukon government to make that happen, so that everybody that needs a place to stay warm overnight has a space to go. And then just to touch on a little bit more on emergency preparedness, which Shane has already mentioned a little bit, just remembering that emergency preparedness is a shared responsibility and we all have a role to play in that. So today you got to hear a little bit about how some of our organizations are preparing at the organizational level, but it's also really important to remember that there's also a big responsibility for individuals to be prepared for emergency situations, any situations. So like Shane was saying, make sure you've got a plan that works for you. There's not really a cookie cutter plan that's going to work for every household and every family or individual. Making sure you have that 72-hour kit, like Shane was saying, you might have to go in the spring or fall to kind of adjust it to the different situations that might be happening during those seasons. Knowing where you can find that source of truth, again, you can see that on the slide here. And then also remembering to check in on your neighbors, your family and friends. I think the Yukon is pretty well known for making sure we all look out for each other during emergency situations. So just making sure you're checking in with others to make sure that they're all right. And yeah, that's all I have. Over to you, Julie, I think.
Thanks, Ursula. And thanks so much to all of our speakers today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Likewise, thank you to the media who are here in the room and also joining us on Zoom. We are very thankful for your presence here and your work during emergencies as well. Just a quick note before we move on to media questions, which will be starting with CBC in the room and then going through the room, hopping to Zoom. We will also be distributing these slides in PDF form after this event. I'll send them to your emails. Just a little note. Okay, so we'll go now around the room, CBC, CKRW, and then Sean with one question and one follow-up question per outlet. Keely has a mic that she'll be bringing around just so that people who are on the Zoom broadcast can hear what your questions are. And then we'll move to the online reporters after that. Okay, take it away.
Hi, wondering if the mines are still disconnected?
Currently, they're not disconnected.
Can you elaborate a little bit about what went into the decision for that?
Yeah, it's dependent on that generation percent. So when we get back down out of that orange zone into yellow or below, and Yukon Energy has the extra generation available, that's when we allow the mines to reconnect to the grid.
I got the chance to talk with Stephanie a lot over the holidays, so I feel I want to talk a little bit about the money side of operations that we haven't heard that much. We got very close to a very dangerous situation. To not find ourselves once again in that, how much money do we need to avoid that and to get to a place where infrastructures will be able to meet the demand without having that plan.
And follow up on that one for sure.
Virginie, taking it to Macklin now with CKRW.
So I understand the grid was obviously nearing its limits. I'm wondering if someone can sort of give me a sense of how close we were to seeing some of these rolling blackouts.
Yeah, it's a bit of a complicated answer that really depends on how much the public can reduce load when we call on their support. So for steps 1 to 4 of the mutual aid protocol, when we're calling on that supporting generation, we have a pretty good understanding of how much support we're going to get. But when we get to step 5, where we send out that alert ready messaging and ask the public to reduce their load, that's the big unknown. So for a bit of context, in those load graphs, the difference between those nighttime lows and those daytime peaks is roughly 20 to 30 megawatts. So if we need that support during the day, and if the public can reduce load similar to what they use at night, which would be if they can reduce by 20 megawatts, then I'd say we're still a decent ways away from the rotating outages. But if we call on their support and they only reduce by 5 or 10 megawatts, then we're just that much closer. So.
And how are certain neighborhoods selected, I guess, for rolling blackouts when it comes to timing?
Well, the system is pretty dynamic. It's going to depend on what kind of load we're asked to shed from YEC, what state the system is in, like if certain elements of the system are available or switched around a certain way, that'll dictate what neighborhood. We won't be hitting the neighborhood multiple times. We're going to try and disperse those amongst all neighborhoods best we can.
I believe my question is. Perfect. I believe my question is probably best addressed to Tony. When you were talking about cold load pickups, you mentioned making sure that non-essential items are turned off and not drawing power. Is it better to turn off the breakers entirely in those situations, or if there's a power bar, for instance, would it be better to just unplug that? Is there an option that is going to make things easier on your end, easier for Yukoners? I'm not doing a great job of phrasing this. What's the best course of action in terms of what a Yukoner would practically be doing?
I think it would be whatever easiest for the customer. I mean, power reduction is power reduction to us. If they want to do it at their breaker, if that's easier for them, or they want to do it on a switch, as long as we can reduce those and be mindful of what those loads are. Your hot water tank, it's drawing quite a bit. If you don't need to, have it on, great. That's a big load reduction. Not using your oven, maybe you use your microwave. Those small steps, they go a long way.
Okay, we are going to move to Zoom, and I believe that we have Yukon News online. So we'll start with Yukon News, and then if there's anyone I've missed on the Zoom, then you can ask your 2 questions after Dana.
Hi, thank you. What is the capacity at the CGC for youth warming center?
Yeah, so for the warming center during the day, that would just be the capacity of how many people could be in the CGC at any one point. If we do get to a point where that looks like it's going to be too many people, we'll be working again with Yukon government to establish more warming centers and find other facilities that we can get people to.
Jane, anything to add on that, or you're good? Okay. Next question from Dana, please.
Sorry, I have a few questions. I'm just trying to prioritize. What does this?
Sure. We will have time for at least one more round of questions after this. So just ask one, and then we'll have time to go through the reporters again at least once.
Thank you, Julia. What does this all mean for Grid Connect? And does this push it up as a priority? Grid Connect to British Columbia, to the North American grid.
Yeah, that can definitely help us at times, but we also still want to keep in mind the scenario where that connection breaks. So we still need to be able to rely on being self-supported because transmission lines do go down. So if that transmission line goes down, we want to ensure Yukoners still have enough generation to be supported.
Okay, thanks. We'll go back to CBC now, I think, in the room. Any other questions? Okay. Any other questions from CKRW? No. Any questions? Yeah, we do have one from Sean. Yay. Where's the room mic?
This is one of the conversations that has been happening a lot over the last, since before I moved here, has been the discussion of the need for diesel generators as backup for situations like we saw in December. How many diesel generators would we need to comfortably get through a long cold snap like we had last month?
Yeah, that's another complicated question because it depends how you want to look at it. Do we want to continue mutual aid, or do we want to try and get to the point where we don't need mutual aid? And then there's all the rental diesel generators. Do we also want to get to the point where we're not renting those diesel generators again? So for a bit of context, the 22 rental diesel units currently provide us with about 40 megawatts. So if we're going to replace that, we need an additional 40 megawatts. The mutual aid we have in steps 1 to 4 of those guidelines gets us, I'd say, in the range of 10 to 15 megawatts. So then we'd also need to replace that. And then the load in the Yukon is growing every year. We looked at some data from last November to this November, and it looked like we had roughly a 3 megawatt increase from last year to this year. So we have to replace what we currently don't have and then keep up with that pace of growth.
Okay, back to Dana. We have a couple more minutes, so yeah, we have time for a few more questions. Oh, wait, sorry. Actually, sorry, Dana. We've got a hand up from Chris Windier on Zoom. Have you got a separate question?
Yes, thanks. I was about to chat, urgently send a chat. I have a question about the battery storage. We had the minister say recently that the project is late and over budget and is not going to provide the storage that was initially hoped. I'm wondering if Katherine can give us an idea of how over budget and how much less capacity that battery is going to have, and also how much would having a grid battery helped us during the recent cold snap?
I will have to follow up with the project team on that one, but we can get back to you.
Okay, any other questions, Chris?
Yeah, I guess. So you mentioned the amount of growth in demand, and obviously that's population growth, the increase in the number of houses that are heated by electricity, for example, in Whistle Bend, things like that over the years. Governments of both parties have, in the last decade or so, had various proposals to increase the amount of renewable supply. There was going to be pump storage. There was going to be more wind and solar. There was going to be the Atlan Hydro project. Now there's supposedly the Grid Connect project, yet none of these, apart from some incremental small renewable projects, have really come online. So I guess my question for Katherine and Tony is how frustrated are you with the Yukon government's failure to develop generation capacity to keep up with the territory's population growth?
I wouldn't say I'm frustrated. One thing is with renewables, although they're green energy, they're not dispatchable. When we're talking about cold load pickups and extreme cold, they don't aid in our situation or very little. So new generation that is dispatchable would be the areas that we'd need to focus on.
Yeah, I'll just add that, we don't want to look at the past too much. Looking forward, we have our Whitehorse Power Centers project that we're pushing to try and solve this problem. And if you would like more information on that project, we're happy to set up another interview with you.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Dana, and then I'll do like one quick more round of everyone for one last question as we wrap up.
Sure, I do have a question. I just want to follow up to clarify. Can you just briefly define what new generation that is dispatchable versus not dispatchable? What does that mean?
Dispatchable energy is, if you take a diesel generator, it's ready and available when you need it. Intermittent renewables, they don't have that same ability. I mean, if it needs to be sunny out, needs to be windy, it doesn't have the same capability.
Thank you so much.
And then we'll just do one last round of Sean, Yukon News, CBC. Any other questions from Sean? No. Okay. Back to Dana.
Thank you. What's the word on if anyone can chime in on this, what's the word on the propane supply during the extended cold weather period? And maybe, Katherine, is this something that the Yukon government is investigating or needs to look into?
I have not heard about this. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, I can speak to that, Katherine. So, Dana, when we first started to enter the cold snap, in addition to working with our critical infrastructure partners in the power utilities, we do also interact with the fuel supply and distributor network, and there were no real issues with the propane supply. I mean, Inuvik is facing that situation now. That's a little bit different. But we do work closely. We meet several times a week, especially in the cold weather, and it's not really the propane that's an issue. It's more the liquid fuels that come in to fuel these diesel generators. The majority of the propane issues that we were made aware of were simply tank pressure issues because of the extreme cold or tank heaters not working, that sort of thing. Does that kind of address your question?
Yes, thank you for that.
Okay, great. Any final questions from CBC before we wrap up? Great. Okay.
Hi.
Thank
Sorry.
You.
Sorry. I just have
to
one more.
unmute?
Yeah. Sorry. I have one more question just about the battery. I take Tony's point about the dispatchability of wind and solar, but I guess I didn't quite maybe get the response I hoped for on how useful battery storage would have been in this most recent situation. I guess regardless of where the power came from, having a grid scale battery, like how much would that have helped? Thank you.
Yeah, so there's many different use cases for a battery, and you have to remember that in order to use it, you also have to charge it. So Yukon Energy hasn't brought this forward to the operations group yet, but I'm sure we will develop a plan so that the grid is most reliable and we can rely on the battery when we need it the most when it comes in service.
Okay, thank you so much to all of the media who joined us today. We really appreciate you, as always, taking the time to attend these briefings. You will be hearing from us again not too distantly in the future for our first spring seasonal flood risk outlook, which should be a few months from now. And I hope everybody has a really great day. Thanks. Take care.